So today is Palm Sunday. It's when we celebrate Jesus' entry into Jerusalem mere days before his arrest and crucifixion. Now, up until this point in the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus has traveled to all sorts of places, but he hasn't yet traveled to the capital, Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem has an interesting place in the world and in the Gospels. The city's name is often translated as City of Peace, but throughout much of human history, peace has been elusive in and around this city of peace. Just a couple chapters later, Jesus will lament over the city, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often I've desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. The city of peace so often turns into a city of conflict and death, and God's outreach and care is often met with destruction. But even so, Jerusalem is still the holy city and capital. It's the cultural and religious center of Israel at this time, and Jesus, along with countless other pilgrims, travels to Jerusalem to be here in the city to observe the Passover. The Passover celebrates God freeing the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. So as you might imagine, the Romans occupying Israel were not big fans of the Passover. Passover put freedom on everyone's minds, and the risk of rebellion and insurrection went up. The Roman troop garrison was reinforced to deal with the increased population and the increased risk of violence. And the city here is tense with energy and expectation. And into this high-stakes situation comes Jesus. Jesus has been healing and teaching and performing miracles throughout the land, and he's gathered a lot of followers. And we know that there have been large crowds following him around, and now he decides to enter Jerusalem. And he enters the city on a donkey, and there are crowds around him. Some of these crowds would have been people who had been following him. Some were likely pilgrims also on their way to the festival. And we can't rule out that some people were citizens of Jerusalem who were out and about that day to see what was going on. As Jesus enters the city, people lay cloaks on the road and lay down branches. Now, it's worth noting that it's only the Gospel according to John that mentions palm branches. Matthew and Mark just say branches, but don't specify the species of branch. And Luke doesn't mention branches at all, but only tells us about cloaks. But here in Matthew, we have branches that might be palm branches, and we have cloaks. And this action of laying down branches and cloaks is essentially people laying out the red carpet for Jesus' arrival. It's a sign of respect. Now, one detail I noticed in the commentaries this year is that because Matthew combines a couple events that aren't combined together in the other Gospels, Jesus actually enters Jerusalem on a Monday in Matthew. So Matthew has Palm Monday, or non-species specific branch Monday. So is this really important? It is not. But it's a good example of how the church intentionally preserved a variety of traditions about Jesus rather than sticking to just one option. It's clear a diversity of views and witnesses about Jesus was chosen rather than just one option. So anyway, what is going on with this entry scene? A key aspect is all four Gospels depict Jesus as enacting a prophecy from the book of Zechariah, where a king will come humble and mounted on a colt. So Jesus' entry into the city is shown as being both kingly and in accordance with Scripture. And in ancient times, and also sometimes today, rulers and conquerors of cities will parade through after a big triumph. The Romans would do this. And it's a particular show of strength to march through a city on a fine horse with your soldiers. But Jesus is a different sort of king than the Romans. He comes humble and mounted on a donkey. Jesus is a king who emphasizes love and service over might, making right. Church Father Ephraim of Syria wrote a hymn of praise to Christ. And the last line of it is, "Blessed is your birth that stirs up the universe." One detail unique to Matthew is that the text says Jesus' arrival sent Jerusalem into turmoil. A better translation is that the city was shaken. It's the same sort of reaction Herod and the city of Well, then I'll just leave now. The children went down to Sunday school. It's fine. Is Howard here? I'll have to submit another payment to the swear jar for Lent.
Paid in advance.
So that's a sailor special, probably, right? You'll have to make a custom option for me. So one detail unique to Matthew is that the text says Jesus' arrival has Jerusalem in turmoil, and a better translation is that the city was shaken. And it's this sort of reaction that Herod and the city of Jerusalem have when wise men arrive announcing the birth of the King of the Jews and ask for help finding where the star might be leading them. At the crucifixion, Matthew says the city of Jerusalem actually experiences an earthquake. So the city is emotionally shaken on Palm Sunday, or Palm Monday, and it's physically shaken on Good Friday. So Jesus' entry into the world and into Jerusalem stirs and shakes things up. He changes and challenges the established order. So here, God breaking into the world knocks powers and principalities off balance. You know, I practiced a number of times. That was never one of the errors I made. So the crowds greet Jesus with cries of Hosanna, which means save us. And to the authorities looking on, Jesus was dangerous. He was stirring up and inspiring the crowds, and the leaders, not unreasonably, feared that Jesus would incite a riot, resulting in harsh Roman reprisals. So the leaders are shaken. But for the crowds in Jerusalem, Jesus is the man of the hour. They'd heard about all the signs and healings he'd performed. They'd heard about his teaching and debates with the religious authorities. In Jesus, the people had someone to put their hope in. He became the vehicle for their dreams and longings of freedom and prosperity. In Jesus, they saw the possibility of an independent Israel, the possibility of a king that was one of them. We human beings love a hero. We love having someone to inspire us and be the container for all our hopes and dreams. We constantly build people up to be heroes, whether they deserve it or are suited for it. Our culture constantly does this with musicians, athletes, actors, celebrities, even elected officials. There's a very basic human desire to have people we can call heroes. One of the documentary series I've been enjoying recently is the Untold series on Netflix. These are all sports documentaries on individuals, companies, or events from all parts of sporting life, from like baseball to sailing. And one of the documentaries on there is called Untold, The Girlfriend Who Didn't Exist. And it's about football player Manzi and his 2012 senior college football season at Notre Dame. Now, during Teo's time in college, he plays really well, and he also begins a long-distance relationship with a girl he meets online. And he tries a number of times to meet her in person, but there's always reasons why the meeting ends up called off. Now, during his senior year, his grandmother dies, and then mere hours later, he receives a call that his girlfriend has died. And Teo is devastated by this 1-2 punch of losses, and he dedicates his senior season to his grandma and his girlfriend. And he has an absolutely phenomenal season. He becomes the inspirational sports story of the year. He's being considered for the Heisman Trophy, and Notre Dame makes it to the championship. The NFL draft was coming up, and it seemed like he was going to be one of the first picks in the first round. However, everything falls apart. It turns out Teo's girlfriend was a hoax. He was catfished, which is when someone pretends to be someone they're not online. So he was tricked here. And when the media got hold of this scoop, Teo's downfall from the hero of college football to the greatest villain of the sporting world was swift. And the documentary actually does a really good job of humanizing this college football news event of the season, and it shows how absolutely devastating this all was for Teo in terms of his mental health and his career. But an article that came out at the height of the media storm was a list of the most hated athletes in the world. Lance Armstrong, Tiger Woods, and Manti Te'o. One of the sports journalists who covered Teo's story back in 2012 is interviewed for the documentary, and she says, "I don't think Teo had any concept of how much the media will build you up and then how quickly they will tear you down." The adoring crowds greeting Jesus as a national hero shouting, "Save us" on Palm Sunday, they're the same ones who are going to shout, "Crucify him" on Good Friday. Human beings love building up heroes. But more than we love heroes, we love watching them fall and tearing them down. There's something terribly captivating about watching the once mighty and powerful fall from grace. The Palm Sunday story is an opportunity for us to look in the mirror and see ourselves in that crowd. Scandal sells, whether it's celebrities, athletes, or politicians. We constantly build people up and tear them down. We need people to pin our hopes on, and maybe we even see parts of ourselves reflected in them. And then if we're honest, we also delight in the failure of those same people because they give us a way to feel better about our own failures and shortcomings. When Jesus enters Jerusalem, the people ask, "Who is this?" And the events of Holy Week give us a pretty good idea of who Jesus is. Despite Jesus being built up and torn down like countless people before him and since, he offers us a different sort of hero than the one we expect or the one we often want. When the crowds rush out of Jerusalem to greet Jesus as a victorious national hero, Jesus then rides into the city on a humble donkey. Jesus isn't going to be bringing liberation through conquest. God in Jesus Christ saves the crowds through suffering and dying. Heroes in our society just don't look like Jesus. He died one of the most humiliating deaths the Roman Empire could inflict on someone. To be quite blunt, he died like a no-good criminal. Jesus shows us and teaches us to value things differently. Jesus shows us in his humble riding on a donkey and in his death on a cross that humility can beat pride, that suffering and sacrifice are nobler than conquest and might. Jesus says no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Christ rode into Jerusalem through cheering crowds to face his death. He laid down his life for his friends and for all people, even for those who turned on him and conspired to kill him. And he shows us that God's glorious love for each and every one of us, no matter who we are, no matter where we come from or what we've done or how society views us. As we begin Holy Week, we walk with Christ as he experiences some of the worst aspects of what human beings can do to each other. It's a time for us to remember when we've torn others down and when we've prepared a cross rather than a welcome. But as Holy Week finishes with the joy of Easter and the living proof that no cross we build and no death we deal can stop our God from reaching out to us and working in the world to raise us up, no matter how far we've fallen or been torn down. Amen.